Y'all better get me woke up because I'm going to be, y'all noticed how clumsy I am already this morning. Thought y'all might need a little bit of excitement to wake some of y'all up, so we tried to make a little bit of a mess. Wasn't as bad as the time I stepped off the stage and fell flat on my face. We won't talk about that. My scripture today is coming out of the book of Galatians. Chapter 3, verse 23 through 29, according to what's on the board, and I'm going to stay with that. Now, to say a word or two before I get started, I have never done much in the book of Galatians. It was totally foreign to me. I've been teaching Sunday school lessons since my early 20s, and I cannot remember ever teaching a Sunday school lesson out of Galatians. And that's where I learned most of what I know is in teaching Sunday school lessons. If you want to know how to learn something, become the teacher, not the student. You think students study, think about what teachers have to go through so they can learn enough to tell the students what they need to know. But when I was reading through the scriptures for this Sunday, this one said something to me. So I decided I needed to go back, do a little bit of studying, and see if I could come up with something that would go along with it. Now, I'm reading this out of the Living Bible, which I've got a reason for it, and I'll explain that in a few minutes, maybe. But if you would like to read along with me as I go into the book of Galatians, chapter 3, beginning with verse 23. Until Christ came, we were guarded by the law, kept in protective custody, so to speak, until we could believe in the coming Savior. Let me put it another way. The Jewish laws were our teacher and guide until Christ came to give us right standing with God through our faith. But now that Christ has come, we don't need these laws any longer to guard us and lead us to Him. For now we are all children of God through faith in Jesus Christ. And we who have been baptized into union with Christ are enveloped by Him. We are no longer Jews or Greeks, slaves or free men, or even merely men or women. But we are all the same. We are Christians. We are one in Christ Jesus. And now that we are Christ, we are true descendants of Abraham, and all of God's promises to him belong to us. This book was written by Paul. And I want to say a couple things about Paul before I get started. Number one, Paul was a lawyer. Now, when we think of a lawyer, we think of somebody that's going to take somebody up in front of the court and try to convict them and put them in jail. Or we think of somebody that's going to go into court with the guy that's fixing to be put in jail and try to keep him out. That's our first think of a lawyer, correct? Or maybe it's the person that makes sure that you dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's and initialed every page and signed everywhere you should sign on some contract that you're going into. Paul was not this kind of a lawyer. This is not the kind he was. Paul was a studier of the laws of Moses. The Mosaic laws, the Jewish laws, whatever you want to say. Paul had devoted his life to studying these laws and knowing them. And he believed them. These laws were established, and I may be getting ahead of myself here, but these laws were established so that the Jewish people could stay in contact with their God. Now, Paul did have one thing in common with lawyers of today. If something can be explained with 10 words, they use 40. And Paul was much the same way, and that's the reason I use the Living Bible to read what I wanted to read today. If you sit back and take the King James Version and try to read it, you better have about 30 minutes to figure out what it had to say. The Living Bible puts it a little more plain, although there's still a bunch of stuff in there that can be filtered out. The second thing I want to say about Paul, and this is David Moye's opinion. Y'all know Bob Jones used to always say, you fixing to get the Bible according to Moye? Well, that's what I'm fixing to do right now. This is my opinion, and my opinion, and $4 or $5 will buy you a Starbucks maybe, if you buy one of the cheaper ones. I've never had to buy one of them, so I don't know what they cost. I believe in the cheap coffee downtown that I can get for $1 a cup. But Paul had to be frustrated. Think of that just a second. Think of what he did. Paul would go into a place. Now, he had been convicted by Jesus in his meeting, and he would go into a place and he would be preaching the word of Jesus, this new belief that all we needed was to have faith in Jesus. And he was preaching it to Jews and he was preaching it to Gentiles. And he was having success with it. People were basically flocking to him, if you will, until what would happen? Some Jewish leaders would come along and start saying, this isn't right. They would begin to persecute him just as they persecuted Jesus. They would begin to chase him. They would oftentimes run him out of town. But every place he went, when he left a very strong, viable church. But then once he would leave, these people would start coming in and telling the church, well, you know, this man Jesus, maybe he was all right, but you still got, if you're going to know our God, you still got to follow our laws. And it was a constant frustration to him, it had to be, to know that here he's done all of this good, and yet here are people coming in and talking to the people he's converted, and they're putting roadblocks in their way, if you will. And what it led to was him writing all of these letters, and we won't go into the fact of whether he wrote every letter he was attributed to, every letter that's attributed to him. We won't worry about that, because if they weren't written by him, they were written by someone that believed like he did and used his thoughts in presenting these letters. But he would have to write these letters back to these people, telling them, reminding them what he taught, what Jesus taught, and not to be fooled, if you will, by the false teachings of these other people that's coming in. And it had to be frustrating to him. But think about it. Out of everything out of everything bad, out of everything bad comes something good if you look for it. And because of this frustration and because of these problems, we have all of these letters that we can go back and look at and know better how to receive this gift that has been given to us of Jesus Christ. The city of Galatia was no different than Corinth or Colossians or any of these other letters that he wrote. He had come in. Again, had he even been to Galatia? I'm not sure he even went there. I know I'm getting a little mixed up because I'm teaching a Sunday school lesson in a few minutes, and it's kind of along the same thing, but it's on a different town. But anyway, they had a Bible church there in Galatia, and yet here comes these people in saying, hey, you know, you're going to believe in this Jesus, that's fine, but you've got to follow our laws. And Paul writes back to them and says, no, wait a minute. And what he does, if you go back through the entire book, is he goes all the way back to Abraham. And he starts all over with them. He tells them, you know, God came to Abraham and made Abraham a promise. Now, Abraham was not a young man whenever God came to him. Abraham and his wife both were beyond childbearing age. They had decided, well, we're not going to have any children. We'll just live out our life. God told him, said, if you will follow me, if you will have faith in me, if you will believe me, I will make your descendants as the grains of sand on the seashore. That's a bunch of descendants, right? You pick up a handful of sand and try to count the grains, and then look at all the sand on the seashore. Well, Abraham, although, like I said, he was beyond childbearing age, he and his wife both, he believed in God. He loaded up everything he had and he moved to another country. That takes a lot of courage right there. How many of y'all have had to leave home and move to another place to make a living? You got something going good where you are, and yet here comes somebody and offers you a job somewhere else, and says, hey, you know, I can do better over here. And that's what God told Abraham. He said, load up, move over here. I'll make it even better. And he believed him. And at the age of, 90? Guess what? His wife had a child. The greatest thing in the world that could happen to him. But what did God tell him? God says, God says, Moses, do you believe? Excuse me. God says, Abraham. I got too many names floating around in my mind. God says, Abraham, do you believe in me? Yes, I do, God. Then take this child, Isaac, into the wilderness and offer him to me as a burnt sacrifice. Kill him, lay him on the altar, kill him, and burn him. And Abraham said, okay. Now, I'm sure it wasn't just an okay. But he said, okay. So he did. And when Isaac asked him, he said, well, Father, where's the sacrifice we're going to offer? He said, God will provide. And when they got there, and he had the young man bound and laying on the altar and had raised the knife, God said, stop. And God provided. He said, I believe in you. You believe in me. How many of us have got that kind of faith? Well, you know the rest of the story. He goes on and he talks about, okay, Isaac has 2 sons. One of them's Jacob. But Jacob goes off and he has 11 sons, 12 sons. Can't even count anymore. He has 12 sons, and they become what? They become the Jewish people. But you know what they did? They didn't say they were sons of Abraham. They didn't say they were sons of God. They said, we are sons of Israel. And who was Israel? Jacob changed his name to Israel. Changing names no big deal. Saul was originally who? Paul was originally Saul. He changed his name. Abraham actually changed his name. His original name was Abram. So Jacob changed his name to Israel. But instead of the people, his children calling themselves sons of Abraham, they said, we're sons of Israel. They ended up in bondage in Egypt and actually turned away a little bit from God. A good bit from God. Almost totally. A few people left believed in him. And after a number of years there in Egypt, along comes this man Moses and says, listen, God's talked to me. He wants you. You are his people. He wants you to follow me, and we're going to go back to Abraham's land. He said, I'm going to lead you back to where God told Abraham to go to start with. But one of the first things he did when he got him out of Egypt was what? They stopped by the mountain, and God gave him the 10 Commandments. And God told him what? He said, if you will obey these 10 Commandments, I will be your God, and you will be my children. And he was beginning to work on that promise that he had made Abraham, to make his descendants like the grains of sand on the seashore. And Paul tells them these 10 Commandments became the law which protected you. And as it has protected you, it has made you closer to God. And we depended on this law to protect ourselves until such time as the law could be fulfilled. One of the things they had to do was sacrifice. The law was so complicated that these people could not obey all of the laws. Have you ever thought about that? You realize that there are so many laws out there now that we are all sometime breaking a law. I mean, we cannot follow all the laws that our country has put on us. And these Jewish people, Paul told them, said, you can't follow all these laws, so you had to sacrifice. But he goes on and he says, and this is where things really get interesting. He says, now Jesus has come along. He has died. That was the ultimate sacrifice. And he's explaining all this to these people in this letter. This is your ultimate sacrifice. Then he was raised from the dead. This proves that he was the Son, truly the Son of God. Who else has been raised from the dead? Now, he brought some other people back to life, but what happened to them? Later on in their lives, they passed away again. Jesus did not. He ascended directly into heaven. And Paul tells them, with this sacrifice, if you believe, if you have the faith that Abraham had, you have now become a child of God. There are no longer Jew and Gentile. There are no longer slave and free man. There are no longer male and female. We are now all Christians. We are now all children of God. To put this in today's language, there's no longer, we don't have Methodists and Baptists, Protestants, Presbyterians, Catholics. Yeah, we all believe slightly different. Whatever denomination you happen to be in. I have arguments with people constantly, but you don't even have to be a member of a church. And people tell you, oh yeah, you got to go to church to be a Christian. No, you don't. What do you have to do to be a Christian? Believe in Jesus Christ. If you do that, if you have faith in Him, if you are baptized in Christ, you're a Christian. Don't mean we're perfect. We'll never be perfect, but we strive for that, do we not? We should. We are all different, and yet we are all the same. And if We are. Not only are we, and band, come on back up. I'm going to cut y'all some slack today and let you out early. We are all Christians. We are all children of God. We are all descendants of Abraham. Think about that. What was God's promise to Abraham? Your descendants will be as the grains of sand on the seashore. We're now one of those grains.